DraftKings, and they made a deal with Anthony Joshua.
Yeah.
It's like, let's bankrupt
We'll give you 100
these
mil.
motherfuckers.
Yeah.
Let's bankrupt these motherfuckers. We're going to bet it all on me. I mean, that's like a Guy Ritchie movie,
It is.
you know?
Yeah, you're an absolute idiot. There was no reason for, first of all, you go to jail. Why would Netflix, the biggest streaming platform in the world, partake in anything like that? Just use your brain. And MVP, too much to lose. You go to jail. Federal effing prison.
Jake Paul's a fraud in terms of boxing. But worse than that, after all his hype about what he was going to do to Joshua, what did we see? We saw a cowardly display from a guy who shouldn't be anywhere near a boxing ring.
All right, so Joe Rogan absolutely exploded on Jake Paul, and I mean, he went off about this whole situation involving Anthony Joshua and their fight. Word on the street is that Jake Paul was reportedly trying to bribe Anthony Joshua during the lead-up to their match, which is just wild when you think about it. Rogan didn't hold back at all when criticizing this alleged $100 million deal that was supposedly made with Joshua, calling it nothing short of a disgrace to the entire sport of boxing. He's saying that Jake Paul's tactics are completely undermining boxing's integrity, and here's the thing. When you start throwing money at a fighter just to secure specific outcomes, you're not just bending the rules, you're literally damaging the credibility of matches across the board. It's the kind of thing that makes people question whether what they're watching is even real competition anymore. And Rogan's point is crystal clear. This isn't just about one fight, it's about what this behavior does to the sport as a whole. Now Rogan throws in this interesting comment saying, not for Jake Paul? Of course, that'd be awesome. I'm saying for you, which really captures his frustration with how this all looks from a fan's perspective. He's basically saying, yeah, maybe for Jake this seems like a winning strategy, but for everyone who actually cares about boxing, for the fans who want to see legitimate competition, this is terrible news.
Anthony
Young
Joshua,
Bucks.
who was gonna be the guy.
Destroy some sports books also, apparently.
What are those odds?
they lose $100 million or something, I think.
Yeah.
That's where.
Yeah, there's a lot of
Might take a
people
dive
betting on
there.
the Jake Paul underdog right now.
There's people betting on him?
Yeah, because he's got that's plus 650. You're making 6 times
Yeah.
the money you put in.
Yeah, but what are the odds?
I
Really?
mean, not good, but
What are the
that's
odds, really? I know I literally said, what are the odds?
So, here's what Joe Rogan reportedly emphasizes next, and this is crucial to understand. Anthony Joshua stayed completely focused throughout this whole mess, and didn't fall for any of Jake Paul's schemes or tactics. Rogan warns that if Joshua had actually taken the bait, if he had compromised the integrity of the fight, it would have been absolutely heartbreaking for boxing fans everywhere. Like, imagine tuning in expecting to see a legitimate heavyweight contest, only to realize you're watching something closer to a wrestling-style spectacle rather than a real fight. That's the nightmare scenario Rogan's painting here. He points out pretty directly that Jake seemed to be aiming for an easy, staged victory. Something he could claim as a win without actually having to prove himself against a true champion. But here's what saved the whole situation. Joshua's skill and composure kept the contest authentic from start to finish. His professionalism and refusal to compromise meant that the integrity of the sport was preserved, which is exactly what needed to happen. When you think about it, Joshua could have easily gone a different direction, could have taken whatever money was being thrown around, but instead he chose to protect what boxing is actually supposed to be. That's the kind of decision that defines a real champion, someone who values the sport over a quick payday.
That's why I think the only reason the odds are not 40-1 is
People suspect shenanigans.
shenanigans.
Yeah. They suspect shenanigans.
But a first
If they
round.
come out and fucking circle each other like pro wrestling and grab the ropes, we're going to be like, no.
Yeah. Yes.
You motherfuckers.
When Nate fought him, that was great.
Well, listen, that's another fight. Look, Nate, no disrespect to Nate, but Nate fought his career at 155 pounds for the most part. A couple fights at 170.
When you look at someone like Anthony Joshua, you're looking at a very good boxer, and I'm talking elite level here, even when you compare him to MMA standards. Ariel Helwani points out something really important that people might have missed. Anthony Joshua didn't take unnecessary risks for money, and the reason is pretty simple when you break it down. The guy already has enough wealth. He's not some struggling fighter desperate for a payday who might be tempted to compromise his values or take shortcuts. Helwani emphasizes that Joshua's focus throughout this entire situation was on preserving his legacy rather than chasing what would have been, let's be honest, a pretty meaningless payday in the grand scheme of his career. By staying cautious and fair in the fight, by refusing to participate in whatever circus atmosphere was being created around this bout. Joshua protected both his reputation and the sport itself. That's a huge deal when you think about the long-term implication. Helwani warns that if Joshua had been reckless for money, if he had decided to play along with any kind of staged or manufactured outcome, it could have damaged boxing's credibility in ways that would be really hard to recover from, and it would have set this dangerous precedent for other fighters. Like, if a respected champion like Joshua starts playing these games, what does that tell younger fighters coming up? What does that say about what the sport values? Instead, Joshua's measured approach throughout the entire lead-up and the fight itself ensured a respectable contest, one that people could watch and feel good about. He was demonstrating something really important here, that some fighters actually value honor and legacy over short-term financial gain. And in doing so, he was actively preserving boxing's integrity. That kind of decision-making is what separates true champions from people who are just in it for whatever they can grab. And then Joe Rogan comes out and declares something pretty bold, that Anthony Joshua is the best heavyweight boxer alive. He's not hedging or qualifying that statement either. He's going all in on it. Rogan praises Joshua's skill, his strength, and his ring intelligence, which when you watch the guy fight, all of those qualities are on full display. He explains that honestly the fight's outcome was inevitable from the moment it was announced, because when you really break it down, Joshua's experience and technique far surpass any challenger like Jake Paul by such a massive margin that there was never any real question about how this was going to go.
You're an absolute idiot. There was no reason for, first of all, you go to jail. Why would Netflix, the biggest streaming platform in the world, partake in anything like that? Just use your brain. And MVP, too much to lose. You go to jail. Federal effing prison. AJ, for what? For what? He doesn't need it. He doesn't need more money. It's great, but to risk this? No, look at what's going on with the gambling. No way. There's no way. My respect for Jake has grown. I know people don't like to give him credit. You fight amateur, influencer, pro boxing. You have my respect. I don't care what kind of fighter you are. I don't care how many wins you have. You step through those ropes, you have my respect. He lasted 6 rounds. Most didn't think he would. I think the line as far as how many rounds was 2.5. So clearly most people thought he would be out of there around that point. And I think a lot of people were going with the under. He had some moments. He had the antics. Obviously the takedowns and all that weren't great. But golly, I think he was tired. The ring was bigger, and everyone said that was going to benefit him, the 22 by 22 ring. But, cardio has been an issue for him. And so when you're circling and dancing, you're going to get tired. You're going to gas out. And I think that happened. Arms were down, and he was getting pinned. He was getting cornered, and he was getting, AJ was doing a great job, I think, of not letting the fight be contested in the middle of the ring, cornering him either in the middle, like the turnbuckle, or up against the ropes. He was cutting him off perfectly. And so I know people are going to be upset that AJ didn't get rid of him.
So let me tell you about Frank. And when I say this guy knows boxing, I mean he really knows boxing. We're talking over 70 years of boxing experience here, which is just an absolutely insane amount of time to dedicate to understanding every aspect of this sport. Frank shares the fundamentals of what he calls the noble art, and he's spent decades guiding boxers of all levels with this unmatched expertise that you just can't get anywhere else. Drawing on his decades in the ring, both as a fighter and as a teacher, he emphasizes over and over the importance of discipline, technique, and respect for the sport, because those 3 things form the foundation of everything boxing is supposed to be about. When it comes to Jake Paul, though, Frank doesn't mince words. He's blunt and critical in a way that only someone with his experience can really pull off. He straight up calls Jake Paul a fraud in the boxing world, and he's describing his antics as clownish, warning anyone who will listen that someone like him has no place near serious competition. Frank stresses that boxing is not for spectacle or hype. It's not about creating viral moments or generating social media buzz. It's about 2 fighters stepping into the ring with proper training, proper respect, and proper skill. He believes that fighters must honor the sport's traditions, the ones that have been built up over more than a century of competition. Frank's perspective really highlights the contrast between true skill, the kind that takes years or decades to develop, and showmanship, which can be manufactured in a few months with enough money and marketing. He's reinforcing this fundamental truth that only those who genuinely respect the craft should be allowed to participate at a professional level, while characters like Jake Paul, in his opinion, should stay far away from professional boxing entirely. That's not just gatekeeping either. That's someone protecting something they've dedicated their entire life to understanding and preserve.
Self-preservation at the very top of his agenda. It's so difficult to pin him down. He runs, he dodges, he grabs, he slithers to the floor, he grips onto your legs, all the kind of stuff that you would never see from anybody with a semblance of experience in boxing. So let's get this out of the way. Jake Paul's a fraud in terms of boxing. But worse than that, after all his hype about what he was going to do to Joshua, what did we see? We saw a cowardly display from a guy who shouldn't be anywhere near a boxing ring from now on. In fact, if there hadn't been ropes around that ring, then he would have been back in the changing room in the first couple of minutes of the contest, because he was running for his life. He was terrified. Let's look at AJ's performance. Let me say it's extremely difficult to box against somebody who doesn't want to engage, who doesn't want to actually come and fight, and that's what they were there for. But Paul made up his mind long before this fight took place. I will run for eight rounds. And I can go and put on my resume that I went 8 rounds, the full distance, with the former heavyweight champion of the world. Finally, let's hope this is the end of Jake Paul as a so-called boxer. He never will be a boxer. I've got guys whom I train up and down the country who would flatten him in 3 rounds. Amateur boxers who are miles better than he is. He has got nothing going for him in the boxing world.
Dan Rafael provides what's honestly a pretty detailed and fair analysis of the Anthony Joshua versus Jake Paul fight, and he's focusing purely on what actually happened in the ring, which is refreshing when there's so much drama and leggo flying around. He gives credit to Jake Paul for surviving as long as he did, which some people might not want to hear, but Rafael notes that Jake's extremely defensive and, let's be honest, pretty unpopular style was genuinely the only way he could last multiple rounds against someone of Joshua's caliber. Rafael compares Jake's constant movement throughout the fight to riding a bicycle, just constantly pedaling away and evading like a criminal avoiding capture, which is a pretty vivid way to describe what was happening. He's emphasizing how this approach, however cowardly it might have looked to fans wanting to see a real fight, actually did prolong the contest beyond what most people expected. But Rafael also points out something that's on Joshua too. He says that Joshua could have done a better job cutting off the ring, acknowledging that Anthony played his own role in why the contest lasted longer than it probably should have. That's pretty fair criticism, honestly, because when you have the skills Joshua has, you should be able to corner someone who's just running away. Despite this tactical criticism though, Rafael praises Joshua's skill overall, stating that when the knockout finally came, it was impressive and absolutely deserved. Exactly the kind of finish people wanted to see. He also highlights Joshua's honesty afterward in assessing his own performance, which shows the kind of self-awareness and professionalism that real champions have. Rafael concludes that taking the fight was actually sensible for Joshua when you think about it, because it balanced the financial incentives, and let's not pretend the payday wasn't significant, with his professional responsibility to take fights and stay active. The bout ultimately showcased Joshua's dominance in exactly the way you'd expect, while also, and Rafael's being generous here, giving Jake Paul some credit for enduring as long as he did against a legitimate world-class heavyweight.
A Looney Tune. I mean, yeah, like you said, did it go 6 rounds and last, a few longer? I'll give credit to Jake for hanging in there. Part of it was because he employed an extremely unfriendly for fans style, but it was the only way he could do it if he wanted to survive that many rounds, which is to basically get on his bicycle and ride around the ring for a bunch of rounds and then get off his bicycle and run, like a criminal at night after the cops show up. So it is what it is. I mean, it'll be the fact that it's still resonated shows you the interest that there was in the fight, and certainly that knockout was a viral clip. And and I'll quote the great philosopher Eddie Hearn. We're going to take care of Jake Paul and on to the real boxing in 2026.
Yeah, the great philosopher. Yeah.
It is a risky fight. I mean, I'll put it like this. It's one thing to say I want to do a calendar year where I'm fighting Fabio Wardley for his title, and then I'm going to fight Fury. There's nothing wrong with that. But anybody that would consider Fabio Wardley at this stage should be a tuna fight is just not being honest about it. It's a real fight. And I think there are some people out there that would say it poses just as much danger as risk or a gamble or however you want to describe it as it would be when he fights, or if he fights Tyson Fury. So Joshua has to make some decisions about that. I don't think they're going to take that risky of a fight going into the prospect of a Fury fight. I mean, it's fun for us to sit here and bullshit about it, but I just don't think that's legitimate. I don't think that's real. I mean, I understand why Frank Warren and Fabio Wardley and their group would want that. They would welcome that fight because it's a winnable fight, and it's a bonanza in terms of compared to whatever money Fabio Wardley has made in his career so far. But if you're Joshua.
So Spencer Fearon offered his take on the Anthony Joshua versus Jake Paul fight, and his perspective is really interesting because he's suggesting something that a lot of people were thinking but maybe didn't want to say out loud, that Joshua may have subconsciously held back during the bout, Fearon believes. And I think there's something to this, that had Joshua unleashed his full power from the very start, from the opening bell, he could have easily finished Jake Paul within the first round or two, no question. Like, we're talking about ending it before Jake even got warmed up. At the same time, though, and this is where Fearon shows his fairness as an analyst, he gives credit to Jake Paul for executing what was actually a pretty solid game plan, given the impossible situation he was in. Fearon notes that constantly moving, staying as far away as possible, and maintaining that defensive posture throughout was literally the only realistic approach for Jake against a world-class heavyweight like Joshua. What else was he going to do? Stand and trade punches with a guy who outweighs him by a significant margin and has knockout power that's been proven at the absolute highest level. Fearon points out that while Jake has shown significant improvement since his previous fights, and you have to acknowledge that he has gotten better, including learning from his loss to Tommy Fury, which exposed some real weaknesses, he still faced an overwhelmingly superior opponent in every measurable way. He also acknowledges the work that Jake's team has done in preparing him, emphasizing the genuine progress that Jake has made in terms of basic boxing skills and conditioning. Overall, Fearon frames the fight as this interesting balance between Joshua's restraint, whether conscious or subconscious, Paul's tactical efforts to survive, highlighting both the massive challenge Jake faced and the credit that's actually due for lasting as long as he did against someone that much better.
I'm glad that Anthony Joshua came out and said that it wasn't my best performance straight away. It's the first thing that came out of his mouth. So when I was saying what I was saying about the fight, I thought it was a very lackluster performance. I thought his performance wasn't that good. I'm glad that he addressed that, because people don't like, you say something about, oh, you're hating, blah, blah, blah. No, I'm not hating. We have to call it into its context, and its context is this: Anthony went 6 rounds with a YouTuber, right? He was polished on certain things that he was doing, but there's something inside me that said, like, there was an unconscious bias in his mindset to say, I'm going to carry him a few rounds, because if I just go out there and blast him out in 1 round, it ain't going to look good. And I think Anthony Joshua subconsciously carried Jake Paul, because I think if Anthony Joshua went bing bing and went out straight away bombing, right, he could have easily dispatched of Jake Paul. But in the same thing, we have to give credit to Jake Paul in he had a very decent game plan. When people say, oh, well, you just came, you ran, what else is he meant to do? Anthony Joshua is, just out of curiosity, what else is Jake Paul meant to do? Jake Paul, for crying out loud, you lost to Tommy Fury, for crying out loud. Let's be real. Let's call it as it is. Even though he's made massive improvements. So, I mean, Jalen Love, who's working with, I know Jalen for a long time, so massive big up to those guys. He's vastly improved. Right, and do not be surprised if they don't slip him in for a cruiserweight world title shot against a WBC champion, and him not coming out victorious.
Alright, so rumor has it that Jake Paul aimed to sway the fight in his favor through whatever means he could. But here's the reality, his plans didn't succeed, and he ended up mostly just trying to stay safe in the ring, which became pretty obvious as the fight went on. Analysts who watched this thing closely observed that his approach focused heavily on staying mobile throughout every single round, keeping away from any sustained pressure that Joshua tried to apply, and avoiding direct exchanges at literally all costs. While some analysts see this as a clever defensive method, like he was being smart and strategic about his survival, others interpret it completely differently, as a sign that he was really struggling under the challenge and just doing whatever he could to make it to the final bell. Despite all the controversy surrounding his intentions, and there's definitely plenty of that to go around, Jake's ability to remain active and keep moving, to navigate the ring under this constant threat of getting knocked out cold, showed a certain kind of resilience and quick thinking that you have to at least acknowledge. Even if, and this is important, it didn't translate into any real dominance or moments where he looked like he belonged in there. Observers emphasize that this fight really exposed the difference between flashy tactics, the kind of stuff that looks good on social media or in highlight reels against non-professional opponents, and true mastery that comes from years of dedication at the highest level. It's reinforcing why experience and technique are so absolutely crucial when you're competing at the top level of boxing, because you can't fake those things when you're in the ring with someone who genuinely has them.
Could this be the end for him in terms of what he's doing in the boxing ring?
Listen, so long as people will tune in and so long as Jake Paul is paid by Netflix or any broadcaster to air his fights, we're going to see this continue. And Jake Paul knows his business model, right? Now, this deviated, this AJ fight, which came together kind of last minute after the Tank Davis fight fell apart. But we know Jake Paul's MO here. It's find the most popular guy with the most physical disadvantages for me to fight. And Jake Paul has the benefit that he's turned himself into a villain, or in the pro wrestling circles, a heel. People tune in to watch. We did not tune into this fight to see competitive boxing. Most of us tuned in because we thought, here's Anthony Joshua. Here's a two-time unified heavyweight champion, a guy who physically just overwhelms Jake Paul. And we're finally going to get what Tyron Woodley and Anderson Silva, Nate Diaz were not physically fit, whether it be through their size, experience, or age, to do, and that is knock out Jake Paul. And so, because I don't really feel like we got that satisfying comeuppance that a lot of people have been waiting for, it kind of gives Jake Paul a little bit of mystique, I'd almost say, to still try and string this along. Now, I don't know in terms, he says he wants to be cruiserweight champion. I'm not quite sure what the competitive road there is, because let's make no mistake, the reason this fight lasted as long as it did is because Jake Paul focused exclusively on being elusive. He did his best, and kudos to him, right? He did a great job of not getting cornered. He was always on the gas until the gas sort of fell out from underneath him. And so I don't quite know, short of leveraging his popularity, how he's going to get to that title shot if he's not actually going to fight, like really fight an elite boxer. But if he's looking to make money, there's the KSI fight out there, there's the Tommy Fury rematch. There is ways for Jake Paul to sustain.
So Joey Knight provided what I thought was a really thoughtful and candid assessment of Jake Paul's showing against Anthony Joshua, and he's someone who knows what he's talking about when it comes to analyzing fights. He highlighted the stark reality of facing a heavyweight like Joshua, and I mean really emphasized what that actually means physically, that absorbing a clean right hand from a fighter like that is far beyond anything you're ever going to encounter in regular sparring sessions at your gym. Knight noted that Jake's resilience in actually getting back to his feet before the referee's count reached 10 was a key moment in the fight, demonstrating his mental toughness despite being completely outmatched in terms of skill and power. He praised Jake for withstanding that kind of pressure and maintaining enough composure to continue, even if his overall performance fell way short of anything resembling victory or even competitive success. According to Knight's analysis, and this is where his experience really showed, the bout served as a crystal-clear illustration of the gap that exists between a professional world champion who's fought at the highest level for years and an inexperienced contender who's mostly fought carefully selected opponents. It showed that strategy and evasive skills, no matter how well practiced, can only take you so far when you're facing someone with real championship-level ability. Knight's commentary managed to balance criticism of Jake's overall performance with genuine recognition of the effort it takes just to step in the ring with someone like that, offering an honest perspective on what the fight's challenges really were and acknowledging Jake's determination to survive against elite competition, even if survival was basically all he could manage.
Saying he took a dive or anything like that, but you can go over. People can't question you too much, but fuck me, it's not like taking a big old punishing right hand from AJ. And speaking of the right hand that AJ gave to Jake Paul, listen, Jake Paul was up at the 10 count. I see AJ give that same right hand to Robert Helenius, and he was out for the count, and he was juicing. So that's a win there for Jake Paul. And do you know what, yeah? When we speak about like the sparring stories before the fight, I just thought, nah, they're talking shit. Hold my hands up. I had it wrong. Lawrence Okoli weren't talking shit. I'm sure Jake Paul did win a round or two against Lawrence Okoli. We've just seen him do it against Anthony Joshua there. So I think that then moves us on to Anthony Joshua, and we've got to speak about Anthony Joshua. Listen, I do think that you box to the level that's in front of you sometimes. If you see me in the gym sparring with professionals, I look way better in those spars than I do sparring against amateurs that have had one fight or something like that, because they're not orthodox. They don't do things the way you're expecting them to. And also, we've got to mention the fact that despite there now being a probably plethora of highlight reel shots for Jake Paul to be able to clip up, he probably landed 15, 16 shots in total on Anthony Joshua, or about that. Despite there being loads of that he'll clip up and use and stuff like that, let's not rewrite history with this fight. This fight was Jake Paul coming and running. Now there's a style of running, and if you're ever going to run, do the one that Jake Paul done just now, because he did still let off multiple big power shots. A couple of his shots he landed with double jabs, and it would only be the second land, but he did still let off multiple big power shots. He had a go. He had as much of a go as you can.
Dillian Whyte came out and openly admitted something that honestly most people already knew going in, that Jake Paul had virtually no chance against Anthony Joshua, like zero realistic path to victory when you looked at it objectively. He was acknowledging the enormous skill and power gap between them, which exists on every level you can measure. Yet, and this is what made his comments interesting, he expressed genuine surprise at how long Jake managed to stay upright and keep moving throughout the fight, which was actually unexpected given Joshua's usual dominance and finishing ability. Whyte's observations also raised some interesting questions among fans and analysts who were paying close attention, because it did seem unusual for Joshua to allow Jake to survive into the later rounds without pressing harder for a decisive finish much earlier. Like, why wasn't Joshua just walking him down and ending it in round 2 or 3 when he clearly had the ability to do so? This unusual pacing sparked quite a bit of speculation in the boxing community about whether the fight was being managed carefully for some reason, or if there were strategic considerations at play to prolong the contest, maybe for the sake of the pay-per-view value, or to give fans more rounds of action. Despite all these curiosities and the questions they raised, Whyte emphasized that Jake's endurance and his ability to stay on his feet, even if it was just temporarily, and through constant movement and evasion, showed a certain degree of mental toughness that deserves at least some recognition. Overall, his commentary highlighted both sides of this, really Joshua's overwhelming superiority that was never in doubt, and the surprising resilience Jake displayed under the most extreme pressure he's probably ever faced in any competitive situation. It left observers and fans debating the real dynamics of the bout, trying to figure out what was actually happening beneath the surface, and whether what we saw was Joshua at full intensity or something else entirely.
Chance, but then I watched it the next month. I was like, he actually did way better than I thought he would have did. But people forget Jake Paul, rostered Ohio State wrestling, so he's tough. He's not as good boxer as good skill, but he's tough. You know, wrestling is a very competitive sport in America, and to be a Ohio State wrestling level, you have to be they're physically tough and physically strong. You know, so yeah, he was tough. That's why he survived in there. He did what he had to do in there. You know? He got tagged with a few shots, and he did extremely well. AJ did poor.
In those situations where the fighter is that negative and had those kind of tactics, he went to ground a few times, etc. I don't think people quite understand it. It doesn't matter who you are, it's quite difficult. People expect AJ within 20 seconds to literally with the first punch thrown or the first jab thrown just to knock him out. It's not that easy, is it, when a fighter is kind of going in there to just survive?
It's always easier to beat someone that's coming to win than someone that's in there to survive. But they should have known that. They should have known that Jake Paul is never going to come to win.
That's it for today's video. Stay tuned until next time.